Pokemon is one of those franchises that became a cultural phenomenon in the late 90s and early 2000s. It came to North America at just the right time when RPGs were becoming popular, as was anime, and even trading card games were still catching on. But Pokemon had everything it needed to become a media empire. Before coming to North America, Pokemon Red and Green were released. They had several issues with them, and while the game is largely the same as you would find in the North American releases and in the later Japanese release when Blue was put out, they are quite different in other aspects. They were also very buggy. You could buy some items that you couldn't buy. There were some dialogue changes that helped a little bit. And yeah, they kind of toned down some of the more, not really adult content, but some of the alcohol use in the game. There were also some minor changes to music and also to the animations and the fighting scenes. The protagonist names were also slightly different. Instead of Red and Blue, you could play as Red or Green. And I never saw them as different characters, but if you look closer into Pokemon lore and everything, you might find Green being its own distinct character. It is interesting to see what Game Freak changed when it created Pokemon Blue. It was primarily just minor changes to gameplay and fixing bugs. And I find it a little funny that we complain about stuff like that now, but we're mostly complaining about wholesale changes that need to be made to games, like releasing them as just completely broken video games. Blue is more of just your standard update or a patch to it, which made the game better and easier to play. The version that we got in the US, these were mostly ports of Pokemon Blue in Japan. That was the updated ROM, which fixed a lot of the issues with Red and Green. So our versions of Red, Blue, and Yellow are all based off of that version of the game. This did cause some confusion to me because I thought there would be a game for each starter, so I thought we were going to get a Pokemon Green, and I kind of thought that Pokemon Yellow was going to be similar to that, mostly because I was not on the internet, I didn't have Nintendo Power, and I really didn't know a whole lot about what was going on at the time. I would find a copy of Pokemon Green online at one point, and I could not tell you to this day if it was just a ROM hack or if it was a legitimate version of Pokemon Green. Pokemon Blue was the first version of this game that I played. It was pretty exciting for me to play it, even if I missed out on playing it with my friends, and I didn't get to do a lot of the trading or battles and everything because all of my friends had kind of moved on from Pokemon at the time. Because I didn't get it when the game released, I waited until a friend of mine beat his copy, and then I borrowed Blue from him. That was pretty much how I played a lot of Game Boy games back then. I only really had 2 days when I was going to get new games. That was my birthday and Christmas. So if I wanted to play something that was a newer release, I had to borrow it from one of my friends. And that's how Pokemon happened. I have more memories of playing Pokemon Blue than I do the others, mostly because that was the game that I played. Well, I played it during class, which probably didn't help me out a whole lot, but I also played it on the bus to school. I played it all over the place, just so I could beat it as quickly as I could and get it back to my friend, who probably wanted to sell it so he could buy something else. We also got caught up in the trading card game as well. I think it was the summer after Pokemon Red and Blue came out in North America that the trading card game came out. I could be wrong on that, so don't take that as an absolute fact. What I do know is Wizards of the Coast was originally publishing the card game. I don't really I don't really remember a whole lot about the card game. My friend bought one of the starter packs, and I think it was like it had to be like one of the intro packs or something like that. And I bought a starter pack that was mostly red and green. I could not tell you what they called the pack back then. All I know is it played similar to how like Magic the Gathering played from what I remember. And yeah, I remember playing it a few times, and then we moved on to something else because both of us weren't going to go out and buy booster packs for this, and we only had those 2 decks, so it got boring pretty quick. It wasn't like how we got caught up with like with the Star Wars trading card game when that dominated our entire lives for a good year or so. Pokemon Yellow was the first one that I actually owned. I had already beaten Blue at that point, and I was still into the anime at the time. I think it was on at a weird time, I think like 2 or 2:30 where I lived. So I would record the episodes and then watch them when I got home. I could not remember a whole lot about the show, just that it was pretty much the same plot as the games. And that was one thing I picked up on when I was playing Yellow. You had some similarities, or at least some moments in the games that kind of called back to the anime, especially when you're picking up the 3 starters in Yellow, because you can get a Charmander, a Squirtle, and a Bulbasaur, and the text when you get them kind of calls back to the episodes that those 3 Pokemon appear in. So I played Pokemon Yellow the most. I really loved that one, just because it felt a little bit different from Blue when I had played that. It was a lot of fun to go through. I did play it for this channel at one point, but I don't know if I would really go back and play again, just because I kind of want to keep moving and play through some of the others. But revisiting it when I did, I still remember most of what you were supposed to do in the game, and it was a ton of fun to go through and play. However, of the three games that we got in North America for the first generation, I felt like Red had the best selection of Pokemon, or at least the selection of Pokemon that I enjoyed playing. I couldn't really tell you why, it just sort of felt that way when I went and revisited Red when I was doing this. And I also remember picking up Red probably in the mid to late 2000s when I started like another round of collecting retro games. And for some reason, I felt that I enjoyed those Pokemon more, playing with them, seeing them evolve, and just going through and collecting all the stuff that I couldn't find in Blue. And I also noticed there were a lot of similarities between Red and Yellow with the type of Pokemon that you could collect along the way. There are a bunch of other sites out there that can go through and tell you exactly what Pokemon are in each game, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. I do know that Red and Yellow seem to have a lot of overlap in what Pokemon you can collect. One thing I noticed with Yellow, to jump back to that one, it seems weird that you can't have a 7th Pokemon in your party because you have Pikachu, but he's just following you around the entire time. So nothing would have really stopped you from having another Pokeball on your belt while you're going around. That was just one thing I noticed when I went back and played it again. I kept wondering, well, why don't I have another one? And if I have Pikachu following me around, does that mean I can have other Pokemon following me around, like Ash does in the anime? Can I just have them outside of their Pokeballs and they're all following me around, so then I can have more Pokemon in my party than just the 6? But yeah, that's just me overthinking video games at times. One more thing about Yellow. With Pikachu following you around, you could stop and talk to him, which was kind of fun, and you could see what his opinion of you was. So if he liked you, he'd be happy. When you first start out, he's kind of indifferent towards you. It was kind of fun to see that. It isn't essential to be in the game at all. Like, you don't need that at all in the game, but it's fun that it's there. These games came out like kind of near the end of the black and white Game Boy's lifespan, and they kind of helped to give the Game Boy a shot in the arm and sort of bridge the gap to other iterations of the Game Boy and also to the Game Boy Advance. So, yeah, even though the Game Boy was closing in on 10 years old at that point, at least in North America, it really gave it a boost in sales. Also, the fact that, at least with Gold and Silver, I believe both Gold and Silver are backwards compatible with the black and white Game Boy, so you didn't need to get the Game Boy Color to play those. But it was a lot of fun that just people started caring about the Game Boy again. It was kind of cool. One thing that I don't hear too often about Pokemon, and this might just be my own feelings, but these games felt like an extension of being on the playground in elementary school. At least that's the way I felt about them. Kids would trade tips and tricks about the games. You would have people get together and talk about them at recess or on the bus. You'd have people trying to trade their different Pokemon to see what would happen. And it just felt like one of those last gasps of how people played games back then. It was cool to see stuff like that, and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, even though my friends didn't really play it for that long, it felt like, just a callback to when we were kids, even though we were clearly more sophisticated adults since we were in high school at that point. This was really one of those times where my friends would get together to play this. Normally, we would just kind of go outside and play. We did get together to play other games and everything like that, but this felt a little bit different because, well, it's the Game Boy and you could go outside and play, and that was something that we didn't usually play together because it was kind of hard for us to play like certain games. Like, we couldn't sit down and play Final Fantasy Legend 2 together. And I don't ever remember seeing anybody break out their link cable to play Tetris. But yeah, it was kind of cool to see just how people latched onto the Game Boy in 1998 like they did. In the late 90s, Volkswagen brought back the Beetle. I didn't care much about it, but Nintendo and Game Freak seemed to, as they licensed Pikachu out and made him into a Volkswagen Beetle. It was kind of cool looking, and it was the first and only time I remember actually caring about a car. This was just one of the many things that Pokemon influenced. There were a ton of other fads from this period, but Pokemon had staying power. Furbies, Beanie Babies, Tickle Me Elmo, they didn't stick around as long as Pokemon has. Other things tried to be Pokemon, or people tried to make them Pokemon, even though they had no business doing so, or were heavily edited into being a Pokemon clone. I remember playing several games back in the 90s that felt a little bit like Pokemon, or were inspired by Pokemon, or took inspiration from the same things that Pokemon had done. Something like Jade Cocoon and Monster Rancher are the games that kind of stand out for me when I think back to games that were either mislabeled as Pokemon clones, or were very similar to what Pokemon was. Even when Pokemon started to slip in the 2000s, it was still extremely popular. There were still movies coming out, the anime was still going strong, and the trading card game was still releasing expansions for some reason, but hey, people still really like the trading card game. For a brief period, Pokemon could do no wrong. The internet was still in its infancy at this time, however, it would play a part in connecting fans of Pokemon and other video games as well. Nowadays, you can find plenty of videos about Pokemon. While it isn't as big as it once was back in the late 90s and early 2000s, it's still an extremely popular franchise. While the games at times are kind of hit and miss now, those first three are just wonderful, or at least give me a feeling of nostalgia that I really enjoy. It seems like everybody has their own games that they really enjoy when it comes to Pokemon. Everyone has their own entry point, it seems like. They also have their own favorites. It's similar to other video game franchises as well. And, well, I don't want to say which one is the best. Overall, I will say which ones are my favorites. And those are the first three games. That's kind of where I am. I came up in Pokemania in that specific 6-year period, and it might have been longer. I just think of it as a 6-year period. But it's just kind of one of those fun things to see how Pokemon has grown over time, how the games have changed. I can see the things that I like and don't like that have been carried over. And if I don't like one of the Pokemon games, I can just not play it and go and play one of the ones that I do enjoy. It's a really great series, and I hope it's still around, and I hope that they're still making good games. They do experiment an awful lot. While not every experiment is to my liking, I don't have to deal with it. I can always just go back and play the ones that I like. The first generation of Pokemon games were really a big deal for me. It seemed like everyone I knew was playing them. I don't remember there being the same hype for the second generation, but I was already moving on to other things at the time. Gold, Silver, and Crystal came out at a time when I was more focused on other things. I was not thinking about the Game Boy Color or anything like that. I was more focused on doing stuff that I had to do in real life. I didn't get back into Pokemon until really the Game Boy Advance had been out for a while, and I was looking for something to play while I was in the Navy. We were going on some patrol, I can't remember when exactly, but I saw Pokemon Sapphire in a store, and I picked it up. And I think I tried it a few times and just couldn't really get into it. At some point, I'll end up going back to them, just like I'll end up going and playing Gold, Silver, and Crystal again, and just seeing what those games have to offer and seeing what I missed out on. Playing some of the newer games on the Switch has really been great. Even if I didn't really like Violet and Scarlet as much, I can still go back to Sword and Shield, which I liked a little bit more. And yeah, I find Sword and Shield a bit more exciting and entertaining than I did with, Violet and Scarlet, because I wasn't really into the open world thing that they had created. And I can always still go back to Red, Blue, and Yellow, and I can experience all the other games that I just didn't play because I wasn't as into Pokemon at the time. It is one of the fun things about this series. You can start up any game, you don't need to know anything about the previous ones, and if you have the hardware, you can carry over your party from the previous game. You might just have to do a whole lot of swapping in order to get them into it. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everyone. Bye.